Today on ZZZ Made Easy, we're executing a whole lot of Ablooms with Promeia. This video will cover the basics of Promeia's main mechanics, how you can build her, and some teams you can go into. At the end of the video, we'll cover a few extra moves and tips. This video was made in collaboration with Hoyoverse and uses footage from the creator beta server. There are no sound effects and things are subject to change. Thank you Hoyoverse for the opportunity. Promeia is an S-rank Ice Anomaly agent from Krampus. The Executioner is actually our first Ice Anomaly agent and an incredibly agile character who utilizes Ablooms. Promeia requires field time to build up her unique resources, but allies can help her out by triggering their own Ablooms. While Ablooms are Promeia's main damage source, she's also an Abloom buffer. The more Ablooms you got on the team, the more Promeia amplifies your team's damage. It's looking like Promeia will be the centerpiece for any future Abloom heavy Anomaly team comps. When you fill the Ice Anomaly gauge, Promeia will trigger Freeze. When Freeze ends, it triggers Shatter, which is the damage part of the Ice Anomaly. When Freeze is applied, it also triggers Frostbite on the enemy for 10 seconds after. Frostbite increases crit damage taken, which unfortunately won't benefit Promeia that much. As part of her additional ability, Promeia extends all Frostbite duration by 3 seconds for a new total of 13 seconds. This does affect Miyabi's Frost Anomaly, whose unique Frostbite state now lasts for a new total of 23 seconds. While Promeia doesn't utilize crit damage like Miyabi, a longer Frostbite duration means more time to trigger Ablooms and slightly higher disorder damage potential. To get this effect, Promeia requires a fellow Anomaly agent or a support agent. From her core passive, Promeia's unique resource bar is Corrosive Chill, which is gained from certain attacks and other sources, up to 100 points max. First, if allies trigger Freeze, Disorder, Vortex, or Ablooms, Promeia gains 5 or 15 Corrosive Chill. Second, when Promeia uses her EX special, Shrouded and Shadow move, she gains 10 Corrosive Chill. Promeia herself only gets bonus Corrosive Chill from Shrouded and Shadow. To get more Corrosive Chill, she will need to depend on allies triggering anomaly-related effects, with Ablooms being the big winner. As for Vortex, big disclaimer, as of version 2.8, we have no win agents. The new boss is going to self-inflict the Windswept state. When you trigger another anomaly on a Windswept foe, then instead of triggering Disorder, you will trigger Vortex. So as an example, when Promeia triggers Shatter, she also triggers an Ice Vortex. Instead of Frostbite replacing Windswept, Windswept will stand the enemy. Since Windswept will not be removed, Promeia will now only be able to cause Wind Ablooms during this time. Wind Anomaly is still in development, so for now that's all you need to know. When Season 3 and our first Wind agents arrive, we can revisit how exactly its mechanics work. Back to the core passive, when Promeia gains 50 Corrosive Chill, she converts it into 1 Trial by Cold point. She can store up to 2 Trial by Cold, but you can continue to fill up the bar until full. When you do use Trial by Cold, the next 50 Corrosive Chill will automatically get converted. Practically speaking, if you have a full bar of Corrosive Chill, then Promeia actually has 4 Trial by Cold. Alrighty, let's talk about Promeia's moves. Promeia has a 5-part Sweeping Edge basic attack string that grants somewhere around 18 to 19 Corrosive Chill total. The 5th basic grants the most amount of chill, and it's one of Promeia's most important moves because so many other moves will chain directly into it. Get very familiar with this downward slam. During her basic attack combo, Promeia's 4th basic has her throwing her cape out and it will stay spinning. You can slowly walk around and pressing basic attack at any time will continue to the 5th basic. This state is called Bound Absolution, and if Promeia is attacked, she can trigger an automatic perfect dodge once every 20 seconds. If you don't press any buttons, Promeia is not going to do anything after the dodge. But if you press basic attack, then you can do a dodge counter. Promeia's dodge counter grants around 15 Corrosive Chill, and it chains into the 5th basic directly. Together with the 5th basic, you can get about 20 chill. It's an excellent combo. Promeia has a large number of special and EX special attacks. If you press special from standby with no energy, Promeia will use her plain regular special Cold Flash, which is just a medium range knife attack. It's not a very important move, but it is a heavy attack and it does have wireframes while in the air. Next, we have Promeia's first EX special, Glacial Death. If you have 40 energy, then pressing special from standby will send out knives and Promeia's cape. This is another way to enter Bound Absolution states, but this time Promeia will gain an Absolute Order effect. Normally, while in Bound Absolution, if you press basic attack, you will chain into the 5th basic. While Promeia has Absolute Order, pressing basic attack will now activate her next special attack called Descending Frost. This is a very similar move to the 5th basic involving a downward slam. That is no coincidence. There are some use cases for this behavior, but you do not have to press basic attack at all to do Descending Frost. After Glacial Death, you can just tap special again. The point of Absolute Order is just in case you end up in Bound Absolution through other methods. It's an order that says, hey, instead of doing the 5th basic attack, we're going to do Descending Frost instead. Continuing on, if you use Glacial Death and get hit shortly after, Promeia will enter Bound Absolution and trigger Shrouded in Shadow. This activates Vital View. Promeia dashes behind the enemy, and if you remember from the core passive, this grants 10 Corrosive Chill. You can also enter Shrouded in Shadow during a perfect dodge with pressing special with 40 energy. While this is cool, Shrouded in Shadow is not an actual attack. It doesn't build Anomaly, and dodge counter grants more Corrosive Chill than the 10 bonus points from the core passive. It is just an alternate way to get to the next move though. After triggering Shrouded in Shadow, press special and Promeia will do Layered Frost. This is a stronger version of Descending Frost. It builds a good amount of Anomaly, and again it ends with that Downward Slam. Layered Frost is your reward for getting that Shrouded in Shadow timing. Together, this little maneuver grants around 20 Corrosive Chill. You can think of it as an alternative form of the dodge counter into 5th basic attack. For Promeia's second EX special, Merciless Judgment, this is her most important move, and there are 3 ways to activate it. After you do your 4 basic attacks, keep holding the button after the 5th basic. After the Downward Slam, at the cost of 1 trial by cold, Promeia will do a back hop that does damage. For the second method, after you trigger Shrouded in Shadow and do Layered Frost, keep holding special. After the Downward Slam, Promeia will do Merciless Judgment. For the third method, after triggering Descending Frost, you can hold basic attack or special. Basically, after any of the Downward Slams from Promeia's 5th basic, Descending Frost, or Layered Frost, just hold either basic or special to do Merciless Judgment. The fastest way to get to one of these methods is to just hold special. You spend 40 energy for Glacial Death, Promeia chains into Descending Frost, and she would chain into Merciless Judgment all in one go. So technically speaking, Merciless Judgment on its own isn't that great. It does not grant Corrosive Chill, and it doesn't build a crazy amount of Anomaly. The main purpose of Merciless Judgment comes from Promeia's core passive. When the finishing move of Merciless Judgment hits a foe with an Anomaly, consume 1 trial by cold to trigger Abloom. This Abloom damage is equal to 635% Anomaly damage of the corresponding attribute, and it's Promeia's main damage source. I want to talk about how Promeia's Ablooms calculate damage, but I'm going to save that for the after party. Promeia's Ablooms function slightly different from others, but the general rule still holds true. The higher the original Anomaly damage, the higher your Abloom damage will be. I know that was a lot of info, so let's summarize what Promeia's main gameplay loop is looking like. First, you want to fill the Ice Anomaly gauge via basic attacking or Promeia's special/EX special attacks. At the same time, Promeia will be building Corrosive Chill and Trial by Cold. To accelerate Trial by Cold stacking, try to use the EX special, Glacial Death, right before getting hit. This triggers Shrouded in Shadow for another 10 Chill, and you can do Layered Frost. Another good method is using the dodge counter into 5th basic combo. Once you apply your Anomaly and Promeia has Trial by Cold points, you can hold basic or special during one of her Downward Slam moves. Promeia will consume 1 Trial by Cold to do Merciless Judgment and trigger Abloom. To smoothen out this loop, after Merciless Judgment, you can press basic attack to chain back into the 5th basic Downward Slam. Well, that means you can then chain back into Merciless Judgment by continuing to hold the button down. This method also works by holding special. For example, from standby, with 40 energy, you can just hold the special button the entire time to do Glacial Death, Descending Frost, Merciless Judgment, 5th basic, then loop back to Merciless Judgment. To further lean into Ablooms, Promeia gains 100 decibels when she herself triggers them. If Promeia has more than 150 initial Anomaly Mastery, every point above this threshold grants 1.5 Anomaly Proficiency and increases the whole squad's Abloom damage by 0.35%. Like most Anomaly agents, Promeia wants Anomaly Mastery to apply Ice Anomaly faster. For building AM, she gets free Anomaly Proficiency and buffs the entire team's Abloom damage. Since there are only so many ways to build Anomaly Mastery, everyone can get to 204 AM. This will grant about 81 AP and 18.9% Abloom damage, let's just call it 19% for the video. If you have an S-rank Anomaly Mastery W engine, then Promeia reaches 248 AM. That will grant a sizable 147 AP and 34.3% Abloom damage. I'll discuss how you can reach these numbers later. Going all the way back to the addition ability, when Promeia uses her EX specials, she gains 30% increased Ice Anomaly build-up rate for 30 seconds. Trying to use Glacial Death or Merciless Judgment every 30 seconds. In addition to that buff, hitting foes with EX specials inflicts Presumption of Guilt for 30 seconds. When any squad member hits a foe with this debuff, their Ablooms ignore 40% of the foe's defense. Okay, so on top of the 19 or 34% Abloom damage from the core passive, Promeia also gives all Ablooms 40% defense shred. It should be pretty clear by now that Promeia is an Abloom damage dealer and an Abloom buffer. Assuming we get more Anomaly agents who utilize Ablooms in the future, Promeia can be the core for an Abloom-centric team. Luckily, we already have some Abloom heavy users like Arya or Vivian. Remember, ally Abloom triggers grant Promeia Corrosive Chill, so the more Ablooms going around, the better. Let's finish talking about the rest of Promeia's moves and go over some tips. Promeia's chain attack is pretty wild. It does good Anomaly buildup though, and triggers an Abloom with a 100% damage multiplier. After the chain attack, press basic attack to go into Promeia's 5th basic. If you hold the button down, Promeia can start doing Merciless Judgment. Promeia's ultimate is just like her chain attack, but applies even more Anomaly. It has a stronger 250% damage multiplier for its Abloom, and from the core passive, Promeia will gain 1 Frost ult effect. After using Merciless Judgment, the chain attack, or ultimate, press or hold special, and Promeia consumes Frost ult to do Layered Frost directly. This has a couple use cases, but the easiest way is to just ult then hold special to immediately use Layered Frost. These are Promeia's 2 highest Anomaly building moves, so if you need to trigger Shatter, perhaps for disorder, then this combo should get the job done. If you don't need Anomaly, just save Frost ult for later. If you want to start doing Merciless Judgment after ulting, you must use the hold basic attack input to do the 5th basic. When you're done doing Merciless Judgment as much as you want, press special to then use Layered Frost. Since Layered Frost is a longer lasting move, it's a great opportunity to switch to another agent if you don't plan to trigger Ablooms right after. I like to do this with the Layered Frost after triggering Shrouded and Shadow as well. When you want to tag back in, Promeia has the regular defensive assist. Her assist follow-up deals decent Anomaly buildup, and pressing basic attack after will chain into the 5th basic. If you want to start doing Merciless Judgment as fast as possible, but you don't have 40 energy, or you can't trigger any of these other shortcuts to the 5th basic, then Promeia has one last resort. From standing, if you hold basic attack, Promeia will do Whirling Blade. This is another way to enter Bound Absolution, and from here you can chain to the 5th basic and Merciless Judgment. Promeia's basic attack string actually has a lot of iframes. During the 3rd, 4th, and 5th basics, she is safe while airborne. You can get hit while landing and transitioning, but generally speaking, a lot of forgiveness if you make it to the 3rd basic. While basic attacking, you can also interrupt Promeia's combos with Glacial Death. This can trigger Shrouded and Shadow for bonus Corrosive Chill, and you can then do the stronger Layered Frost. Promeia has a couple playstyles depending on the team. You can try to play Promeia with a stunner, but if they stun too fast, you may not save up enough resources for the stun. You can get more Ablooms with the chain attacks and ultimate, plus Shatter does all its damage in one instance, so it's fine to retrigger it as fast as possible. One problem is that Shatter is the weakest Anomaly by default, and Promeia doesn't increase its damage in any special way. The next issue is that the chain attack and ultimate Ablooms deal less than half the damage of one of the Merciless Judgment Ablooms. Considering you can only store up to 4 Trial by Colds at a time, and Merciless Judgment does take a decent amount of time to loop back into, I would say Promeia is not like Arya as a pure stun focused Anomaly agent. She likes stuns and can take advantage of them, but Promeia does not refill her Trial by Cold points quickly. This does mean, at least to me, that Promeia is going to want another Anomaly agent with a different attribute to cause disorders with. Luckily, if you have Nangong, you get the best of both worlds. You get a second Anomaly damage dealer to trigger disorders, and you get a stunner. Nangong does have an Abloom, but only 1 per stun phase. While that's nice, Promeia's strongest synergies will be with agents who have many Ablooms at a time. Using Arya as an example, she can trigger so many Ablooms, and every single Abloom grants 15 Corrosive Chill for Promeia. If Arya triggered 10 Ablooms, for example, that's 150 Corrosive Chill, which is already 3 Trial by Cold. With Arya teams, you still want to try and trigger disorders, but now Promeia wants to use her Merciless Judgment Ablooms before the stun phase. When you make it to the stun, you can give Arya all the stun time. While Arya is Ablooming away, Promeia refills Trial by Cold, which she can use for Ablooms later. This also applies outside the stun phase, so it's another aspect you have to manage. Do you use Merciless Judgment back to back, or do you swap to Arya to trigger disorder? Ideally, you want to do both. For a 3rd playstyle, Promeia can save Trial by Cold for stuns, and she can partner with an Abloom heavy ally. Vivian is the perfect example because she can trigger Ablooms from off field. Like with Arya, you want to trade disorders with Vivian, but now you have to manage her Feather Blooms. Besides Anomaly triggers, Promeia activates Vivian's Ablooms when she does Merciless Judgment since that's her EX special. Each of Vivian's Ablooms grant 15 Corrosive Chill, so if you manage to use up her 5 stacks, you get 75 Chill back, which is 1 more Trial by Cold. Promeia can only stack 4 Trial by Cold, but after the 4th Merciless Judgment, she should have enough Corrosive Chill back to do a 5th one. Something to remember though is that Merciless Judgment is looping itself with the 5th basic attack, and that grants 5 Corrosive Chill. 5 5th basics grants 25 Chill. 25 plus the 75 from Vivian's 5 Ablooms equals 100 Corrosive Chill, aka 2 more Trial by Cold points. So instead of only being locked to 4 Merciless Judgments in a stun, Promeia can actually do 6 in a row if you start with full resources on Promeia and Vivian. Promeia is buffing all of these Ablooms, so it's the best example of how much stronger Promeia can get the more Ablooms you have on the team. To push this even further, you can delay chain attacks with the manual chain attack setting. This can allow Vivian to regain some feather blooms, and then you can trigger disorders while all of this is happening. Onto the build section, Promeia wants to build Initial Anomaly Mastery since she converts it into Anomaly Proficiency and buffs her team's Abloom damage. With a 30% AM disc for Partition 6 and 2-piece Faithless Melody, you can get up to 204 initial AM. That will turn into 81 Anomaly Proficiency and 19 bonus Abloom damage. This will be the baseline everyone can hit. For those with a 30% AM main stat W engine like Promeia's signature, then you can get up to 248 initial AM. That grants a solid 147 free AP, and the team's Ablooms get 34% bonus damage. Promeia's signature is Frostfall Sickle. It has the Anomaly Mastery main stat, and when using specials or EOC specials, Promeia gets 20% ice damage for 40 seconds, stacking up to 2 times. With 2 stacks, Promeia gets another 35% bonus Abloom damage. Using Glacial Death plus Descending Frost or Layered Frost will already grant 2 stacks. If you loot Merciless Judgment, you can refresh those stacks. Ice damage and Abloom damage are separate multipliers, so great option on top of the initial Anomaly Mastery. For other S ranks, you could use Arya's signature for the initial Anomaly Mastery stat, and at least you get 90 AP with the higher base attack. Since she casts a lot of regular specials and EX specials, Promeia can also use Fusion Compiler to stack its AP buff. However, the pen ratio main stat gets less value since Promeia's Ablooms get 40% defense shred. To be fair, the pen ratio is going to be fine for regular shatter damage, but be aware if you're going to be stacking more defense shredding effects. For A rank W engines, Promeia can use any of the craftable or battle pass options. Generally, Disorder teams love Weeping Gemini for its huge AP buff after 3 to 4 anomaly triggers. You can save Promeia's Ablooms until you get the higher damage anomalies active. As for Rainforest Gourmet, Promeia does get a decent amount of energy, so you could use its stacking % attack buff. If you keep anomalies active and you don't want to think too much, Electro Lip Gloss is fine as a general damage boosting option. It does require the Battle Pass though. I wonder if we'll see more Battle Pass W engines in Season 3. For Drive Disc, Promeia wants the typical Anomaly agent stats: Anomaly Proficiency Partition 4, Ice Damage or % attack Partition 5, and then Anomaly Mastery Partition 6. For her core passive, 2-piece Faithless Melody is a must-have. Promeia then has her own tailor-made Drive Disc set. Notes from the chain grants 10% ice damage for the 2-piece. The 4-piece states when Equipper triggers Abloom, increase AP by 48 for 30 seconds. When Equipper triggers Freeze, increase all attribute anomaly damage and disorder damage by 16% for 30 seconds. This is an interesting disc set because it's the first time we've gotten a way to increase anomaly damage and disorder damage from a 4-piece. The 60% anomaly damage is the same modifier as Promeia's % Abloom damage buffs, plus it also buffs Shatter. % anomaly damage is separate from % ice damage, so generally it's a good thing. Promeia will naturally be triggering Freeze and Abloom, so with the 30-second timer, you have a lot of wiggle room to swap out, then come back in with the buff still active. Really no reason not to use her intended 4-piece. For teams, Promeia functions like most anomaly agents and wants to trigger disorders with a second anomaly of a different attribute. Her main standout trait though is being an Abloom damage team buffer. While Promeia can save her Ablooms to be used during a stun phase, I do not think she is as specialized for it as say Arya. A stun focused anomaly team can work, but it's not the strongest without a certain someone. At the moment, Vivian is the ideal type of ally Promeia wants. Off-field anomaly buildup with a lot of off-field Abloom triggers. You can use Merciless Judgment a lot more often, but if you save Promeia and Vivian's resources, then you can unleash a disgusting amount of Ablooms during a stun. Another Abloom heavy user is Arya. Like we discussed earlier, this team is pretty interesting. Not only will you tag in and out for disorders, but Promeia can use her Ablooms before a stun, then Arya spams a ton of Ablooms during the stun. It's a little hectic, but it's a fun challenge figuring out who to on-field and when. There are a couple more Abloom anomaly agents. Bernice triggers Abloom on her Emblefo entry, and Grace gets 4 Ablooms per ultimate. Besides those two, Promeia can partner with any other anomaly agent for a typical disorder team. Someone like Alice is nice since she can swap out while doing her big Starshine Waltz move. As a note, Ablooms in general do work with Jane's critical assaults. Since Miyabi is a Frost anomaly agent, which counts as Ice for damage typing, you can have a double anomaly team disordering on Ice weak foes. Sadly, freezable bosses have been phased out. Additionally, Miyabi splits her damage between anomaly damage and direct crit damage. Essentially, while this duo is fine to play, they definitely want Promeia to stand out as a pure anomaly damage Abloom carry. You may also want to take into consideration that Miyabi really wants disorder triggers. You will not get any disorders with the new win attribute. Ablooms are unaffected. When it comes to supports, you can use Zhao for a fellow Krampus agent. She buffs attack for the team and provides general damage buffs, plus there's the new Bunny in Wonderland disc set, which you can farm alongside notes from the Chained. Any general team attack buffers will work, like Astra Lucy. Suna can be great to feed Arya Phantom Power, which means more Ablooms to feed Promeia Corrosive Chill. Since she has 40% defense shred, you can also double that up to 80% with Nicole. The main issue with Nicole is that her debuff must be on the foe when Ablooms trigger, and it doesn't last for that long. Promeia takes a while to loop her Ablooms, so it's not the easiest team to play, still an option though. Last, for the premier anomaly support, Yuzuha can just work with every single team. If you run a more on-field type like Miyabi, then Yuzuha can help her build up anomaly while Promeia on fields. Her anomaly damage buff will stack with Promeia's Abloom damage buff as well. Now instead of a second anomaly agent, you can use Nangong for disorders while also getting fast stuns. For the future, be on the lookout for anyone who triggers a lot of Ablooms. Before we move on, I did want to at least mention Lycon and Sokaku. Unfortunately, I don't think the true mono Ice Anomaly team is that great. We get no disorders, and we have no extra Abloom sources. Promeia can do double chain attacks and save ultimate for the stun, but those really do not deal that much damage. She just can't regain Trial by Cold fast enough to spam a ton of Ablooms during a stun like Arya. While this team isn't the worst, this is an example where Nangong being a secondary anomaly DPS really makes a difference if you want a stunner. Next, let's briefly go through Promeia's Mindscapes. For M1, after using ultimate, if Promeia doesn't have max Trial by Cold points, gain 1 point. When any squad members trigger Abloom on foes with Presumption of Guilt, it ignores an additional 20% defense. M1 will basically grant an extra Abloom chance when using ultimate, and the additional ability's defense shred now improves to 60% for Ablooms. You can hit 100% defense shred with Nicole, which is crazy. For M2, Promeia gains 40 anomaly proficiency. Her Trial by Cold Ablooms have their multiplier increased by 120%, so 635% should become 762%. M2 is pretty much just a direct damage increase for Shatters and Ablooms. For M4, when Promeia triggers Abloom, she now gains 5 Corrosive Chill. This can occur every half a second. Normally, Promeia doesn't gain Corrosive Chill from her own Ablooms. Mindscape 4 will change that. For M6, when you consume Trial by Cold to trigger Abloom, Promeia procs a special Abloom that deals 200% anomaly damage of the corresponding attribute. This effect also grants 5 Corrosive Chill and 100 decibels. I believe both effects have a 15-second cooldown though. In addition, Promeia's anomaly damage and disorder damage will ignore 15% of the foe's all attribute resistance. M6 gives Promeia extra Abloom triggers, which will get all the benefits of the previous Mindscapes. It also gives her 15% resistance shred for all attribute types. Promeia's Mindscapes are mainly damage increases with a few bonus Corrosive Chill / Trial by Cold sources. If you want to invest in Promeia, her signature is one of the few Anomaly Mastery main set W engines, which will improve her team Abloom damage buffs. M1 also buffs all Ablooms with more defense shred, but the signature's extra Anomaly Mastery will just make it easier to proc Shatters as well. For the after party, I want to talk about Promeia's other moves in a more casual manner, and we'll cover her Abloom damage calculation. Promeia's dash attack is a simple kick that lunges at the enemy. It changes to the second basic attack after. Promeia's quick assist is the same animation as the dodge counter. It does not change to the 5th basic, but it does change into the 3rd basic, which has its own iframes. Glacial Death does build Anomaly, but it can't trigger Freeze. It's also not a heavy attack. If you want either of those properties, you need to follow up with at least Descending Frost. Shrouded in Shadow is a bit weird. If you do not press any inputs after the dash, Promeia is technically still Shrouded. This means if you press basic attack or special after, she's still going to commit to Layered Frost. However, the second you touch anything like doing the slow walk, that seems to cancel Shrouded in Shadow. Promeia would just do Descending Frost instead. I suppose a use case for this is that if you have a lingering off-field attack from other agents, they can hit the enemy, then Promeia can follow up. Maybe you can wait for an anomaly trigger before Promeia goes with the disorder. Not really sure if this is an intended mechanic. Promeia's ultimate will apply Anomaly in 2 parts mostly. It can trigger Freeze after the first section, then you get the next batch of Anomaly applied to the next gauge. Bound Absolution can suck in and hold smaller mobs together. You can use the hold basic Rolling Blade or just Glacial Death for a quick way to get to this. If you're doing Layered Frost, the cape is actually still on the field as well. Finally, let's talk about Promeia's Abloom damage calculation. As long as you understand that the higher the original Anomaly damage, the higher the following Abloom damage will be, then generally you're good. However, it's good to understand why Promeia's Abloom only has 1% listed. So far, all Abloom damage has been based on a percentage of the original anomaly damage. Here are the values for Grace's Ablooms. Descriptions will list different percentages because each anomaly type has a different damage scaling. Shock, Corruption, and Burn Ablooms are based on a single tick of damage, so their percentages are much higher. Assault and Shatter deal all their damage in one instance, so their Abloom percentages were lower. Let's try to calculate an Ice Abloom triggered by Grace. If you remember our Freeze Anomaly graphic, the base damage of Shatter is 500% of the user's attack. Think of that 500% as a damage multiplier for one hit. When you normally calculate Ablooms, like for Grace, you first calculate the original anomaly's damage. The base damage for Shatter is that 500% attack. To get the total Shatter damage, you multiply the base damage by a whole bunch of damage formula modifiers. This will include the Anomaly Applier's AP, Promeia's percent Abloom damage buffs, and her 40% defense shred, plus a bunch more things. Now, to get Grace's Ice Abloom damage, you take the 70% of the total Shatter damage we calculated. This is normally how Ablooms work. They're a percentage of the original damage. As a note, since Promeia only buffs Abloom damage, Grace's Ablooms will end up dealing more than 70% of the original Shatter damage. Okay, so why does Promeia's Ablooms only have one percentage value? If it worked like past Abloom users, then Promeia would deal 635% of the original anomaly damage. That would be like 6 ticks of burn, which isn't an unusual amount. Well, if you applied that 600% to an Assault or Shatter, then that would mean Promeia's Abloom would deal damage equal to 6 Assaults or 6 Shatters. That would be insane, so unsurprisingly, Promeia's Ablooms do not work like this. Instead, you just treat Promeia's Ablooms as their own thing. The 635% is the new damage multiplier for all attributes. This means it's higher than the Shatter's 500% attack, but still lower than Assault's 713% attack. After we get our new base damage, you multiply by all the usual anomaly damage modifiers, and that's it. There's no percentage of the original damage value being taken here. You're still going to use the stats of the Anomaly Applier. If Promeia is Ablooming Grace's Shock, you can use Grace's attack and AP and other damage bonuses. If you're Ablooming Promeia's Shatter, you would just use her stats instead. To increase anomaly damage, you wanted more attack and a more anomaly proficiency. Higher anomaly damage equals higher Abloom damage. Like I said before, the general rule is still applying for Promeia. How we get there is just slightly different. All in all, the Executioner of Krampus is going to be a major part of any future Abloom teams. She provides some great buffs, and Ablooms do work with the new upcoming Wind Anomaly. Promeia does require a lot of resource management. You have to manage her on-field attacks, dodging, and applying Anomaly. In a Disorder team, you then have to manage the second agent's Anomaly, and if they have Ablooms, then you have to plan out how Promeia uses her own Ablooms, since you don't want to overcap on Corrosive Chill. I do think there is a slight gap for Promeia with Abloom allies and non-Abloom allies. Without the extra Abloom triggers, you need to build more Corrosive Chill solo, so naturally that just means less Ablooms overall. She may seem scary, but Promeia definitely wants some friends to help her out. That's all I have to say for this video. Have fun with Promeia in version 2.8. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.